Hello everyone and welcome back to Crumb. My name is Carla and in this week's tutorial we are going to be making a realistic sugar rosebud and rose leaves. All of the tools and supplies that you need are listed in the description box below. We are going to get started with some pale pink gum paste. I'm just rolling it out thinly on the back of my cell board. You can roll it out on any firm surface. You want to go reasonably thinly with this and pick a rose cutter that will fit around the styrofoam ball that you're using. I'm using a 3/4 inch styrofoam ball that's been hot glued to a 20 gauge wire. I'm cutting out 3 of the smaller size teardrops and 3 larger ones, and then smoothing them out and thinning them out with my ball tool. I'm using a foam pad underneath the petals to help with the thinning process, and then using water or edible glue, and I'm painting the entire first petal because that is going to be used to cover the styrofoam ball. So attach your petal, wrap it around the left side first, and then wrap the right side over, and then just make sure it's attached. You just want to create a little spiral at the top, and that's the only part that people will see, so don't worry about the rest. As for petals 2 and 3, you're going to paint just the base, the bottom half of the petal, with water or edible glue, and then wrap them around opposite each other. So I'm attaching this one just loosely, and then directly opposite that petal I am attaching petal number 3. So you can see here that we now need to just wrap them around each other and close the doors, so to speak. Just making sure that everything is well attached at the base, just to get the sugar to bond with the styrofoam ball. So that is the beginning of your little rosebud. And again, thinning them out with your ball tool on a foam pad. This is optional, but I'm using a rose petal veiner to add some texture and some visual interest to my rose petals. And I'm veining all 3 for this particular row. Now with my Dresden tool, I'm just creating a curl by pulling back the edge, the upper right edge of each petal, and just accentuating that curl with my fingers. The same as before, you want to just paint the base of these petals in a little V with your water or edible glue, and then you'll be finding a seam on your rosebud between the previous 2 petals and then overlapping that with your first petal. I'm gluing down the right edge, and then I'm coming in behind that with the second petal of this row, and then gluing that right edge down. And then doing the same thing with the last petal, coming in behind the petal I just placed, and then gluing down the right edge of that petal. And I'm actually going to be tucking it in here, and then wrapping around the first petal that I placed. Again, closing the door behind the last petal of this row. And then make sure everything's well attached and tidy at the base. You can remove excess paste just by twiddling it between your fingers while spinning the wire. You can do a little extra sculpting and extra primping with your fingers just to get the petals to look the way that you want. You can open them up a little with your Dresden tool until you're happy with the shape. You can stop there and add a calyx, which we'll be doing later, to make a small rosebud. However, I'm going to add 1 more layer of petals here just to make a slightly larger and more interesting rosebud. And again, the larger size of the 2 teardrop cutters that we originally used, you will be using here to make 3 more petals. Thin them out, vein them, give them a nice press in the veiner to make maximum use of all the lovely texture. And then we'll be using the Dresden tool again to curl back the right edge of each petal. If it's easier for you, you can also use the handle of your paintbrush or a bamboo skewer. And I'm flipping the petal around, flipping it over, as you saw there, and then placing it in my hand or on the foam pad and just hollowing it out a little bit with the large side of my ball tool. And that will just help create a cupped shape once we add these to the rosebud. Again, a little glue or water on the base in a V. Find a seam between two previous petals, and then glue on each petal overlapping the last, and make sure your last petal gets tucked into the left side of your first petal, and then close the door behind it. Again, do a little sculpting with your hands. Make sure that the petals are open in the way that you like, and you can pinch them at the tips and create more interest. Open them up a bit with your Dresden tool, and then just make sure everything's well attached at the base as always. We're now going to move on to adding a calyx to the rosebud. I'm using dark green gum paste and a foam pad with holes in it. The center of my pad has a hole that's slightly larger than the others, so I'm using that one. And just making sure the paste is well pushed down into that hole and then rolling out the paste on top. What you're left with is a nodule, which on a real rose is actually called the hip. It contains the seeds. Once you've cut out the calyx shape, place that nodule, your rose hip, back down into the hole in your foam pad, and then use your ball tool just to elongate and soften the edges of the arms of the calyx. I'm going to remove my calyx and now use a pair of scissors just to make some snips. Notice the snips are running parallel with the length of the arm of the calyx. So don't come in from the side and make perpendicular snips, because you'll end up kind of cutting through or cutting off the arms of your calyx. So just pay attention to that detail. I'm using a Dresden tool to add some curvature and some movement to the arms of the calyx, removing it again from the foam pad and flipping it upside down, and then going back in with the Dresden tool and adding even more movement by cupping some of those little snipped sections. Now you'll want to add some edible glue or water down most of the length of each of those arms of the calyx, and then thread your rosebud through. Ideally, you'll aim correctly and get it straight through the middle of the rose hip, and then just attach your calyx. You can now use the calyx to cover up any bits of your rose bud that you don't like, or any seams that are a little unsightly. And just make sure the rose hip at the base is well attached to the wire. And you don't have to let the calyx dry before you add dust. In fact, it'll probably prevent some breakage if you do the dusting when the calyx is still soft. I'm using a blend of crystal colors, fuchsia and pumpkin dust here. It's that pinky peach color in the center. And I'm just kind of burying the color, I guess, into the crevices of the rosebud to create some shadow and depth. And then I'm also taking that color and just brushing it across the edges of the petals. I'm now using chestnut brown. You can use any kind of mushroomy, warm, pale brown color to add some detail to the tips of the petals, and then also a blend of leaf green and that chestnut brown across the calyx. I'm going for a painterly look here, so I'm aiming for some depth and some streaks of color that are not completely perfectly blended. It is, after all, a handmade piece of sugar art, and doesn't have to be completely botanically correct. You have a bit of creative license. And so to finish off, you'll just want to tape down your stem. I'm choosing to do 2 layers of green floral tape down my stem just to add a little bit of bulk. And then you can add some more dust just to help the transition between the rose hip and the floral tape. And there you have it, and here is the full-size rose. We have, of course, got a full tutorial for that, which I will link here. We are going to move on to make the leaves. I'm using green gum paste and a cell stick here. I want to show you two different methods to make the leaves, or at least to wire them. This first method, I'm rolling out a ramp of thickness. You can see there's a thicker ridge in the center that I created with my cell stick. And I'm positioning the cutter so that that thicker groove is running down the middle. And then dip your wire into edible glue or water or egg whites, and then thread it through that thicker groove so that it's about 60% of the way down the length of the leaf, and then just make sure the paste is well attached where the wire meets the leaf. And then the cell stick that you just used to roll out your paste, you can also use the rounded end as a ball tool. So here I'm just thinning out the edges of my leaf and softening them before putting the leaf into the veiner and lining it up with the center line of the veiner. Give it a good press. And if you have any issues removing your leaf from the veiner, just use your Dresden tool or flex the veiner a little bit. Give the leaf a good pinch at the base and also at the tip just to give it some movement. And then you can lay that into some bumpy foam or acoustic foam to dry. Now this is method number 2 for making the leaves. I'm now using a cell board and just carefully rolling my paste out on the cell board. And what the cell board is designed to do is create that central ridge, which is the thicker area of paste, which is where the wire can be threaded through your leaf. You'll want to have a variety of different sizes, unless your project requires one size. But rose leaves in general grow in slightly different sizes on the stem. So thread your wire through as before, and here instead of the cell stick I'm using a ball tool just to thin out the leaf a little bit, and then as before placing it into the veiner, giving it a pinch at the base and then pinching it all the way through to the tip to create some movement, and placing it onto my bumpy foam to dry with a bit of a curve. You'll see here 5 leaves per stem. I've arranged them in the way that I'm going to tape them together later just so you can see. I'm using icing color or gel color by Wilton in a moss green color, which is my favorite for rose leaves. And then I'm just loosening the color with some vodka. You can use lemon extract. You can also use rose water for this, although it doesn't dry with quite the same sheen as vodka or lemon extract. And then just paint the color using a flat brush onto the front of your leaf. You'll see the difference there between the unpainted and the painted one. Just carry on until you've painted the front of all of your leaves with this concentrated green color. And then add another dropper full of vodka or lemon extract to your original green paint to thin it out, and that will lighten the color. And that's what you will use to paint the backs of your leaves. Rose leaves tend to be slightly paler at the back than they are in the front. And add a little paint here and there if you see any areas that look sparse, and then just let those dry. I'm now going to start with some dark green floral tape and just attach it, wrap it around a few times, and then slide it up so that it meets where my leaf meets the wire. And then I'm adding another 18 gauge wire, bending my first leaf toward the left and adding that, leaving a space or an opening, and then bending my next leaf toward the right and adding that directly opposite the leaf that I just added. I'm wrapping my tape around a couple of times and then pulling on those individual leaves to bring them down into position against where the tape is nice and taut. And then adding another small leaf bent to the left and a final one bent to the right, and taping them in nice and snugly, and then continuing to tape all the way down the wire. And then you can just tear off the tape at the end and trim your stem with a pair of wire cutters. And there you have it. There are your beautiful, shiny, realistic looking rose leaves, which you can futz with as you see fit. And that is your completed rosebud and completed stems of rose leaves. And here's the whole arrangement. And as I mentioned before, we do have a full-length, in-depth tutorial for the rose itself, so we hope you will check that out. And as always, thank you guys so much for watching. If you have any comments or questions for us, please feel free to use the comments section below. Check out the description box for more details about the tools and the materials that we used. We also have a link to our gum paste recipe, which is on our blog, so that you can make your own gum paste. And we look forward to catching you in the next video. Cheers!